Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. So my name is Stephan Janssen, and I want to talk about AAP. Now, AAP will not ring any bells for you, but in Dutch, in Flemish, it means monkey. And AAP, or AAP, stands for AI-Augmented Programming. And it really fits in the sense of monkey, because what we're doing these days is that we're basically replacing Stack Overflow with AI assistance. And just without thinking, we're copy and pasting the code into our IDE. And as a result, sometimes these large language models, they hallucinate, which might introduce some new interesting features in your code. So I would say AAP is replacing Stack Overflow for sure. But if you're a senior developer, you know what you're copying, and you know where the problems are and if it is actually hallucinating or not. So you have to really watch out with these things. So just as a quick introduction, last week it was Devoxx Belgium, which I organized together with my wife, Christine. We had about 3,500 attendees. We had 201 speakers. It's 5 days. And there was a lot of interesting talks. This is a part of our team, actually. This is in the Kinepolis Center. And the beauty of organizing a conference like this is that we get, for Belgium, about 900 proposals from 625 speakers. And this is actually a keyword cloud tag showing the most submitted keywords of those 900 talks. And what is very clear, Java is still very prominent, but generative AI and LangChain4j were actually not present the year before. Now, who knows about LangChain4j? Just raise hands. Only a few people. Just give you a quick background. Is that LangChain4j was actually shown for the very first time last year at Devoxx Belgium in 2023 by Liz Raas. She did an amazing job. And it's basically a Java API to talk to large language models. So the beauty is that you don't, because before I was just doing Python development, because that was the only way to get it working, using Python. But now we have a Java library, which actually creates a very nice API to do all sorts of interactions with these large language models. And the beauty as well is that the founder, Dimitro, he was actually at this event. He's a bit shy, he doesn't like to speak, but he was definitely there. He writes the most beautiful code that you can imagine. And things happen at Devoxx Belgium. I like to say the dots are getting connected there. And soon after, actually, the Quarkus team, Red Hat, actually approached him, and he now works full-time on this open source project. So you should really have a look at it. If you want to integrate Java with large language models in your Java environment, then Quarkus is the way to go. And actually, last year, I was doing some research and development on Retrieval Augmented Generation, RAG for short. And RAG is a way to actually find the best components, the best context for the question, using semantic searches, and then injecting the results into the prompt. And it's actually rather sophisticated. You can take a picture of this, but this was a talk from last year that I gave, which you can find here. If you copy the QR code, it actually talks about this RAG. But like I like to say is that RAG was 2023. 2024 is more about AI coding assistance. That's where the excitement was. So originally, I actually submitted this talk for this event, but after last week, I had to just talk about the new stuff, and this is what I want to share with you. Now, before we go in there, if you want to do RAG, there were some really good talks presented last week, and they're already on our YouTube channel from Devoxx. Devoxx has about 160,000 subscribers, and the reason for that is that we publish all of the talks from last week the next day. So if you want to do RAG and try to get your hands dirty, then these are definitely the talks you should watch. There's a very interesting workshop deep dive talk about 3 hours by Guillaume Laforche. He works for Google, where he takes you from naive RAG to advanced RAG. And the advanced RAG, they're really doing some very sophisticated things where they're doing semantic similarities, but on a condensed version, and then actually augmenting your prompt with more concrete data. For me, the eye-opener was actually the talk from Neo4j about graph rack. Because the prototype that I did was, I wanted to know if an LLM chatbot could say how many talks a certain speaker gave. And I never was able to make it work with normal RAG. It always was hallucinating and saying either was 2 talks, 5 talks, where the real answer was 4 talks. So I was missing some piece of technology. And it seemed GraphRag, where it actually creates a graph of your data, and then using that as a way to implement the response, actually gives the right answer. So if you want to do RAG, have a look at these talks. The one from Michael Hunger is really interesting, where he basically uses Neo4j to get the right answers. What I want to talk about is AI coding assistance. So I would like to know who's already using in his daily job AI coding assistance. I would say 40%. Okay. Now, who is not allowed, if you're using coding assistants, who is not allowed to use cloud large language models? Just raise it. I would say 10%. Okay. Now, the reason is, you really have to know this, is that if you're working on a project and you have intellectual property and it's like really code that you are not allowed to share with the public, if you're using a cloud large language model, they will use your data, the data that you send them, as actually input for their data sets, right? There's a funny story, actually. A friend of mine, Geoffrey de Smet, who used to work on Optaplanner, and he now rebranded and forked this into Timefold. When he was doing AI assistant prompts on Optaplanner, the code that it suggested was actually including his comments that he originally does. So he could identify that that code was really coming from his project, because the way he does comments is in a special way, and the code assistant was replicating those comments. Now, it is an open source project, so it doesn't surprise you that they actually have indexed, because they index the whole world. But you have to be really careful, you know, if you have proprietary, protected source code, do not use a cloud provider, right? Now, people ask me, will AI actually replace my job? I say no, but developers using AI code assistants will. I strongly believe that. I mean, I use AI coding assistants on a daily basis, and I work at home, I have no colleagues, so I'm using these AI assistants basically as my virtual friends, but for coding, right? I can actually use it as a way to actually bounce off ideas, get feedback, and actually go into a conversation where I'm getting new insights and new approaches. And it really is like, I mean, it's an eye-opener. I mean, if you compare, for example, what we had last year we had a window context. So this is the size of the prompt that you can send. It was a maximum of 4,000 tokens. One token is on average 2 to 3 characters, right? So you have about 4,000 tokens that you could send last year. That's why you had to use RAG, because you had to chop it up, because you couldn't send everything to the model. Today, you know how big the window context is? 2 million tokens. 2 million tokens, let's put that in perspective. If you have Lord of the Rings, the trilogy, the 3 books of Lord of the Rings, you can send it 3.2 times in one prompt. So you take the 3 books, multiply by 3, you can basically send 9 books in one prompt. 9 books. So that means we're starting to actually evolve to something where we can actually do meta programming, I call it, where I can send my full project, and then start asking questions of like, hey, what should I improve? How can I make this better? How can I do this? That's just amazing. Now, the 2 million, this comes from Google Gemini. So Google is really at the forefront there. On average, the window context is around 131,000 tokens. However, what's really scary is the 131,000 window context tokens actually now work also locally. So I can install local models and have 130,000 tokens locally, and I don't actually even need internet connection. Right. So that's pretty scary. Google actually has already in the labs other approaches where they're moving towards 10 million window context. And the idea is there is that you could, for example, give a full video. Video can also be, indexed, and then you can ask questions about the video and what was said at certain places, etc. So it's just scary. Do keep in mind, it does come with a cost. I mean, on average, if you would send like 2 million window context to Google, it's going to cost you around 15 euros. So you have to watch out. But just imagine, if I have a serious problem with a certain code base, it's going to cost me a lot more to get a senior consultant to work on that for one day. And that's why I'm saying, you will not be replaced by AI, but developers using AI are, one, more productive. You can work faster. You can use it as a really pair developer to bounce off ideas, etc. So, not last week, but 1 year ago, I actually introduced Anton from JetBrains to come on stage and talk about the AI assistant from IntelliJ. Now, out of curiosity, who is using IntelliJ? I would say 75%, 80%. And I'm also an IntelliJ user. And he showed the AI assistant, which was very impressive. But what I asked, and I actually copied the subtitles there, is that I asked, hey, do you guys support open source large language models? And do you support local ones? And it was 2 times no. No, we don't, not yet. So I waited, and like this year in March, I said, like, Anton, any updates on that? And he said, no. And so what I said, well, okay, I decided to develop my own. So what I did, I developed my own, for the first time, an IntelliJ plugin called Devoxx Genie, fully open source, free, and more importantly, completely developed in Java. So if you're a Java developer, just go to this GitHub project, you can clone it, play with it, and you can just install it. And the beauty is that people start appreciating it. Why? Because it supports both local models and cloud models. And you can decide which models you want to use. So it's really pluggable and completely open source. And we're starting to get a bit of traction. We're almost at 4,000 downloads. I think we already have 6 contributors. So people are actually helping, improving it and so on. And what it's using, it's supporting all the cloud models. So it supports Google Gemini, Claude, Anthropic, of course, and so on. But it also supports the local models. And there's basically 3 important players. And the most important player is the middle one, the top one. Do you know the name? Ollama. So Ollama is actually also an open source project. It was originally developed in Python, and they've recently migrated it to the Go language to have it faster. But many of these, LM Studio, Ollama, Yan, they use all the same engine. And the engine they use is Llama CPP or Llama C++. Llama C++ is developed by somebody from Bulgaria, Sofia, and this is really what's been driving all these local models. But the beauty of Ollama is that it's a simple install, it runs on Mac and on Windows, and you can just talk to it locally. So that's pretty powerful. And so that's what I quickly want to demo. If you want to, I only have like 30 minutes, so I can't go in full detail, but if you want to have a broader demo, just copy the QR code there. It will take you to a more in-depth demonstration. So let me quickly go there. So I'm in IntelliJ. You just go to the marketplace in plugins, you type in Devoxx Genie, and you can install it. And the beauty of this one is that I'm doing meta programming here. I have the Devoxx Genie code base, and what I can do, I can actually add here on the bottom right, I can add the full project to the prompt, or I can first calculate and see how many tokens are used. So it says, it's using 90,000 tokens of about 149 files. So it just went through the whole project and calculated that. And then I can add it to my project, which it has done here. Let me make this a bit bigger. So it added the 90 tokens. You can see the small status bar. If I remove this here, you see the blue bar, progress bar, shows how much tokens I have still left to add. And I've selected Ollama, Llama 3.23 billion, which is the latest one from Meta. And then I can say like, write me, read me file for this project. And it doesn't matter if I have typos, because the typos, the large language model understands typos, it knows the context, and so it will basically inject the full project in the prompt, doing RAG, but RAG doing just the full code, that's not really RAG. And then it sends it locally. This is all running locally on my computer here on my Mac. And it basically has created a README file for this project. In what? In 12 seconds. Right? Now the beauty of this is that if I'm not worried about privacy, I can now actually change it and go to, and you can see all the different providers that we have. I can now go to Anthropic, use the best one in the cloud, which is Sonnet 3.5, and continue the chat using the chat memory of LangChain4j. So the first question and the response and the full project will be included in the next prompt. So I could say like, is the README file missing anything important, whatever. Voila. And now I'm sending this, and hopefully the internet works and Claude is not is operational. It's now sending the whole chat memory to Anthropic, which is one of the better cloud providers for coding, and basically gonna give me an answer. So this is like what I called a collaboration between different large language models, because I can start locally, and I've already got the response. And here it says like, okay, the README file I provide covers blah, 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 and so on. So I can start with a local model, then take the output of the model to a more commercial model in the cloud, and then even go with that one to another commercial one, and have like 3 different models reviewing my code, and the end result will be poetry, will be beautiful code, because it has been reviewed by 3, 4 different models, which are much smarter than me. I mean, seriously, come on, we're living science fiction here. This was not possible 1 year ago. So this is pretty scary. But I call it the quantum superposition state. It's both scary and exciting at the same time, right? So anyway, have a play with that. I did this demo last week at the keynote, and somebody immediately tried it out, and he said like, trying out Devoxx Genie on my M3 Max, just pulled Llama 3.2, 132 tokens, window works reasonable fast, and F, I don't know what that F stands for, but he says, this thing is amazing. It just uploaded the whole code base, and it basically created me a README file. But you can do code as well. You could say like, hey, review this piece of code, or what are the patterns I should optimize, or whatever. You have a real assistant, and it's for free, basically, if you use a local one. But you do need a bit of a beefy machine. Okay, so that's the introduction of AI coding assistants. Like I said, it's both scary and exciting at the same time, but there's a new wave. And the new wave is really AI coding assistants using modern Java. And this was really the theme from last week, because up till last week, I was still doing some Python code if I wanted to understand how the attention works, how the matrix multiplications works, etc. What we showed last week were 2 interesting projects which are using Java all the way. And that's what I want to talk about in this next 22 minutes. Now, the beauty of this is that there are some really interesting innovations happening in the Java space. One is Panama. Panama has already the 9th version or the 9th edition of the vector API. And the vector API is basically not the vector API as an array, but actually doing matrix multiplications natively. And that's what we really need. Large language models are basically, at the end of the day, and that's where the bottleneck also is, it's doing matrix multiplications for the model. It's also using the foreign functions and memory, the FFM, which is replacing JNI. But what I'm really waiting for is GPU support. And that's what's going to happen in Babylon. Now, if you can't wait, Tornado VM already has some very sophisticated GPU support as well. And why GPU support? Well, we want to do the matrix multiplications not on a CPU, but we want to push it on a GPU, right? And this will really introduce much faster responses of these large language models running locally. And there are 2 projects that you need to keep an eye on. If you only remember one thing, then it's these 2 projects. We have JLlama from Jake, and I have Llama 3.java from Alfonso, who works at the Graal VM team in Zurich. These two projects are going to change the Java world. I'm guaranteeing you this. Because what they're doing is that they're doing the full large language model inference completely in Java using this technique. Now, Alfonso is a bit cheating because he works for the Graal VM team, so he really knows how to do this stuff, which is very interesting. But let's first look at Jake's solution, which is JLlama. If you want to see his talk from last week, just copy the QR code. He goes in great detail. And it's an open source project, so it's his hobby project. But the beauty of what he's doing is that you can now do inference, and for people who don't know what inference are, is that you ask a question to a large language model, and the large language model will go through its weights and so on and give an answer. Well, that part is called inference. Before we have the model, we have to do training. And those are two different steps. You have training, which creates the model, and then inference, which uses the model. And what he's doing here, this is a pure Java code, doing inference, loading the model, then actually creating a builder pattern to set up your system prompt and your user prompt, and then executing the generate, the one that's underlined, actually triggers the model to get a response. And then you can just print a response using the response text. The beauty of this is that I can do, using my IDE, I can debug and go into all these methods and try to understand how these LLMs work. Yeah, and this is really an eye-opener, especially if you're like a little boy and want to open things and see what's inside. Well, this is your way in. You could not do that 2 weeks ago, because there you would get stuck with some Python codes, and yeah, that's where it stops for me. So this is pretty exciting. And he did a great job to actually make this work. You just clone the project. You use JBang. He supports JBang, which allows you to just run the file from the command line. And he has a few different versions of JLlama. The one I'm using is JLlama REST API, because what it then does do, what this does is that it will, with the auto download, it will download the model if you don't have it yet locally on your machine. It will start a Spring Boot instance, and it has a REST API using the OpenAI compliant REST interface. So that means I can actually just use my Devoxx Genie, which I've done, just point it to that local host port. I think it's port 8080 by default, and I can start chatting with my REST API of JLlama, have that run in a different IDE, and actually debug how it actually goes through the model. It's really eye-opening. It's very interesting to actually see that in action. Just one thing I have to recall. You have to make sure that the JLlama, if you run it, that it's using an ARM-based Java version. I actually lost like a few hours because I use SDK-man, and SDK-man you can actually select a Java version, but the problem on Mac is that it often actually falls back to Rosetta, and it uses the x86 version, not the ARM version. And the x86 version doesn't support Panama features. You need to have the ARM version. So I had to explicitly set the Java home to a JDK, which was only for ARM, and then that worked as expected. So that's a bit of a gotcha that you need to make sure you watch out for. The other talk that you have to see if you're interested is this talk with Alina and Alfonso, which they did last week. That's the link over there to the right. And it's also on GitHub. The beauty of this project, it's one Java file, just one file. All the magic happens in that one file. I think it's like 1,500 lines of code. You can make it even more compact if you want. But it's just poetry. If you look at it, it's just beauty. The beauty of this as well is that because he works for the Graal VM team, they made a native version of this class, and it was faster than the Llama CPP version that's out there for already a couple of years. It was faster. Now, the only gotcha there, it only works on Windows for now. So they are still working to also support Apple Silicon, but it looks very promising. And you can see a graph here. The bigger the model size, the faster actually Llama 3.java is compared to the Llama CPP version. Yeah? And that's really what you want. You basically want to have about 20 tokens a second, which is what a human can perceive. And if you're then doing stream responses, so that way you talk to the model and it's immediately streaming the responses instead of waiting for the full response, you need to have on average about 20 words per second, which you can then easily read. Once it's faster than that, you basically can't read it. So, from a user perspective, that's the sweet spot. But they're doing some very amazing things and very interesting evolutions. Now, there's still some opportunities. There's a couple of opportunities which I want to talk about. One is, for example, large language models, but extremely large language models. So, for example, Meta has released Llama 3.2, and they have different versions, different parameter sizes. So they have like a 3 billion one, which works really well locally, but they also have a 405 billion parameters. Now that does not run on one machine, unless you have a game machine which is really beefed and it's going to cost you like 20,000 euros. There's some opportunities if you only have 2 MacBooks, for example. The other one is GPU support, which I want to talk about. Token caching is another opportunity which you are seeing. There are different cloud providers which are introducing caching. The problem is that the 3 important ones, Anthropic, Gemini, and I think it's Mistral as well, they're doing their own proprietary implementation. So there's no standardization yet. So I'm looking at LangChain4j to hopefully introduce an abstraction where it will support token caching in an abstract way, and then you can have any implementation underneath it. And the last one I would quickly want to talk about is matrix multiplication, but it's an exotic idea that I have that I don't know if it's actually feasible. But let's start with the large language model sizes. What's another talk from last week was sharding. Everybody knows about database sharding, I assume, right? So if your database is too big, you actually have multiple instances of databases, and then one database might do A to M, the other one might do N to R, and the other one does S to Z, something like that, right? Now, this is also happening with large language models. There's this project called EXO platform. Mohamed, he actually spoke last week at Devoxx Belgium. That's the link to his talk. But the beauty of what they did is that it's developed in Python, but they are specifically focusing on Apple Silicon. Why? Because they are leveraging a library called MLX. You can't see the X right on the projector, but the ML, there's an X next to it. MLX is actually developed by Apple to support matrix multiplications on Apple Silicon. So if you use that library, you will get the fastest multiplications on Mac, right? They also have a C++ version. So I was actually starting to play with this, where I actually used then JNI, and now I have to use the FFM one to actually integrate that into the inference. But the beauty is that you start different machines. They use some kind of UDP broadcasting to identify where the other machines are. And once they know that you're part of that cluster, it will use gRPC to actually spread the load of the different model. So what you can do with this, I can now have at home a 405 billion parameter model, like from Llama 3.2, spread the model over 3 machines. This project will download the model on all 3 machines, so you do need a bit of disk space. But once you do that inference, it will go like for the first 10 layers to that one, then the next 10 layers to this machine, and then maybe the last 2 layers to that machine. And you can actually have a really powerful assistant running on your old machines if they are running on the Apple Silicon ARM processors. So that's a trend which is happening. And the beauty is that Jake from the JLlama project, open source project, is doing the same thing, inspired by the EXO platform initiative, but purely in Java. Right? Again, that's the link to his talk. And he's basically doing sharding on layers, on attention heads, or actually both. And the demo he did is that he actually had multiple workers running on a Google Cloud and actually have the coordinator locally on his machine. So he was basically delegating these to the different workers. And it's pretty straightforward. If you start JLlama, you will get a help file, and it actually explains how to set up the cluster coordinator. So he's not using UDP to find the workers. He has one coordinator, which might be a bottleneck, but that's the choice he made for this approach. And then the coordinator talks to all the different workers. And you can actually specify on what level that you want to shard all the different settings. Just have a look at it. It's interesting if you have some rainy weekends and you have a few machines running at home, available, connected. This is really interesting to actually play with. I would definitely recommend and have a look at that. So, still got 10 minutes. The other thing I want to talk about is the GPU matrix multiplications. So there's this project called Babylon. Gary Frost is one of the Oracle engineers who's behind this. I'll actually will invite him for Devoxx Belgium next year. And they already have some experimental implementations. And one of the things is that they are trying to use Triton to actually do CUDA development, but in an abstract level. So the idea is that as a Java developer, we can actually say which part of our methods can run on a GPU, hopefully actually making it faster as an end result. The beauty is that Tornado VM already has this. So they're already experimenting in this way, and it would be nice to see if we could actually make this happen using the matrix multiplications. But there's a new project or a new scientific paper that recently came out where they are not doing matrix multiplications anymore. What they are doing is that they're using the ternary expression to replace matrix multiplications. This could be groundbreaking, because if this actually works, and they actually have a very interesting paper comparing the two approaches, and the link is in the QR code as well, this means that the bottleneck for LLM inference, at least one bottleneck, will disappear. The only downside is that this also has an impact on the training. So you have to actually do new training. You have to train your model using this approach. It's not sufficient that you only do inference using this approach. So I spoke with Alfonso from the GraalVM team and Jake, and they said the same thing, like, yeah, okay, we probably need to do then training, and that's a different story. Training is really data scientists doing this. This is a different field. So I'm not sure if this is going to actually have an impact or how this will evolve, but it's definitely an interesting one to keep your eye on. Cool. So for me, moving forward, where the excitement is actually having JLlama and Llama 3.java play a part using, for example, the Devoxx Genie. The problem, there's a few problems, or let's say opportunities. The first opportunity is that Llama 3.java does not have yet an OpenAI REST wrapper. So I can't use it for Devoxx Genie because it doesn't know how to communicate using this REST interface. So what I can do, because it's just one file, I can just copy it into Claude or into my Devoxx Genie and just say, hey, create me a Spring Boot wrapper. How would that work? Right? I can easily do that. I just go into my IntelliJ IDE here. I could open, let's see, this project here. New window. Llama, here it is. I can just copy it, right-click, I can add it to my prompt context, or I can just copy the full project, because it's just one file, go to Claude. Who's already using Claude? Only a few people. Seriously, have a look at this. This is $20 a month, and you have an assistant in the web. It has a mobile app, so I can sit in the toilet and still discuss about new code changes, or even on the train or the plane. Not in the plane, you need internet connection, but you can just discuss with this. And so what I can do here, I can actually, let me create a new project, demo. Oops, create project. And then in the project, I can actually add text, the project, and paste the full code, because it's just one Java file. There it is. So I add it, and then I say, how can I add a Spring Boot REST interface which is OpenAI compliant? And then I run it. and it will do its magic. It will look at the code, it's just one file, and then it will start giving me some suggestions, which could already be a head start. And I did this yesterday evening, so it's creating the code. The cool thing is that if you don't like this cloud thing, or you're not allowed to do this, you could just do this in Devoxx Genie locally in your IDE, and it will give the same exact answers, right? But it's already saying, okay, well, this is what you need to do. The code, seriously, the code is already very, very good. There might be a few issues here and there, but if you're a senior developer, you know immediately how to change it, and it already gives you a first head start to continue. There it is. I could also say, okay, nice, but could you also make a Quarkus front-end, REST front-end? Now, what's scary here, let's say that it knows Quarkus, but it doesn't know about the latest version of Quarkus. What I can do is just open Quarkus in my IDE. In my Devoxx Genie, I can copy the full project to my clipboard and then add the contents to the context so it will know about all the latest and greatest which is in Quarkus. So this is like, again, I get goosebumps on my arm. This was not possible 1 year ago. Just think what's going to be possible in the next year or the year after. We've only got started, and it's amazing. I mean, as a senior developer, I'm 10 times more productive because I now have this assistant already giving me all the boilerplate codes, and it just works. So make sure you have a look at this because you have to. Cool. Well, I've got another 4 minutes. I think I want to at least pass on, these are definitely exciting times on different levels. If you're a Java developer, it's really exciting because we now will actually have a full Java stack available. We have this sharding. We have lots of opportunities to embed it in our IDE. There's multiple projects out there that you can use, but have a look at Devoxx Genie because it's fully open source. You can just use it. And I still have 3.30 seconds for questions. But make sure you have a look at Devoxx Genie and install it, and we're open for contributions. And if you have any questions, we still got 3 minutes. Thank you.